what happens with the environmental planning after the Cyclone Ditwah. I'm the conservationist Jayantha Vijayasinghe. Sri Lanka has a 2,500 years plus of a fantastic heritage in terms of how the urban planning and how our agriculture and how our developments were planned. We had so many kingdoms over the years leading up to the Kandyan kingdom, after which the colonizers basically landed in Sri Lanka and started vandalizing our central hills. While we had so many kingdoms over the 2,500 years ago, at no point that none of the kings that ruled Sri Lanka ever destroyed the central hills. They were very smart in recognizing that all the rivers that are stemming from the central hills are going to a dry zone, which could be made a wet zone by creating 30,000 plus irrigation tanks. And even to date are studied and explored to understand how they were able to do such amazing, wonderful constructions. They never ever touched the central hills. The colonizers were here. We had 80% of a forest cover in Sri Lanka, and they started grazing our central hills predominantly for tea and coffee, and thereafter for rubber, and thereafter subsequent governments, Sri Lankan governments, upon having the independence, they started cutting down most of our forest cover that was remaining after the colonizers for tea and rubber for other agricultural and irrigation projects. The subsequent governments of Sri Lanka, they basically cut the central hills and to build reservoirs and to fill up the water, which is basically does not make sense because you are taking out the forest cover that is a watershed and a catchment, and that provides water. So the water is going to be reduced and the impacts will be felt severe. And today, if you look at the context right now, there is so much of agriculture, vegetable farming, and all of these are happening in the central hills. So we basically took out much of the forest cover in the central hills, and we put out the plantation companies, various plantations, we expanded plantations, we introduced different monocultures, we even introduced pine plantations. And pine plantations are not good for the central hills because that destabilizes the hills, and that basically does not contribute to the water cycle enough. After the Cyclone Ditwah, there is so many landslides everywhere, and most of these landslides are man-made. If you really look at much of the landslides, some of the landslides were as a result of some mountain areas that were dredged, cut or excavated for development of water tanks, development of agriculture, and some of the areas you see there were road construction that have happened cut in the mountains, and some of the rocks and the rocky structure were basically blasted out using chemical blasting or using explosives, and that basically destabilizes the hill. In this context, you find, and the Cyclone Ditwah basically washed everything off, slid everything off. Every settlement that was built, every road that was cut, every plantation that was established, every monoculture that was planted, and every disturbance that we have created to the hills were basically damaged because of Cyclone Ditwah. We need to now look at a situation where what are we going to do in the future in terms of our environmental planning. Now, if you look at rivers showed what the river's limit is, what sort of an area that it needs to flow. For instance, in the case of Mahavali River, it clearly showed that it needs a huge space for it to flow when it's needed. That the environment showed us that you cannot have villages in these slopes, in these landslide prone areas, in these soil conservation areas, that it need to be moved out. And the environment in general showed us where you can settle, where you can do your agriculture, where the environment and where the environment needs its space. I hear so many politicians and I hear so many people in the past and present speaking about we need to make the 5,000 and above mountains and the hill areas as conservation zones, areas that need to be reforested, areas that need to be places kept for ecosystem services, and the people need to be moved out of these places, which is a very good idea, and this idea is being discussed over a decade or so. And what is required right now is to implement the idea. For instance, Piduru Talagala apple farm area. Piduru Talagala is the highest mountain in the country, easily close to 7,000 foot, and there are different vegetable farming that happens in this area. close to 200 hectares of forest being cleared for this cultivation, and the water is being stolen by the farmers, and these are illegal occupants. Easily we can take these people out, and there is so many other places similar to this that need to be looked at. I see the talk about removing all the unnecessary hotels, illegal development structures in tank cascade systems. It's not happening. We need to take action. We need to take out these people from river reservations and tank reservations, because then the tank can have its maximum fill level, and then the people will not be affected, because otherwise, end of the day, the government will have to spend money in compensating these people, giving them the relief that we are paying as taxes. The money that is collected as taxes, the money that are there for the development of the country, has to be spent on disasters. We need to plan the slopes and the soil conservation areas and the areas where people are settled that have a huge threat, imminent threat of landslides and other disasters. We need to take those people out and make those forests. Cyclone Ditwah taught us what's the limitations and limits of the nation, and it shows us exactly how our planning, urbanization, settlements, agriculture and environmental planning has to be. And let's respect it and plan accordingly to create a safer, disaster-free country.